Welcome to the beJoy podcast. My name is Jordan. I'm your host, and the beJoy podcast is a podcast meant to elevate, expand, and connect the conscious community, both locally and internationally. Today, I'm joined by a dear friend of mine, Ramzy Abueta. Right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, amazing. He is a psychedelic liberator and Myco maven, and we are recording here in his new cafe called the Myco Cafe here in Boulder, one of the first ones ever in potentially the country, we think. And so we're going to be chatting a little bit about his medicine, which is the mushrooms, and I'm enjoying one of the delicious drinks that he made here. So welcome, Ramzy. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, it's my honor. Thanks for hosting this podcast and allowing me to speak my truth. And yeah, cool. Where do you want to start?
So let's start with where you're at right now. So we're in the Myco Cafe, and I see a ton of amazing things here, all the way from local artists to some really delicious things. So what brought you to want to open a mushroom cafe?
You know, I think the slogan that I like to live by is follow the mycelium. I think mushrooms and fungi in general have a very powerful role in the ecosystem, and there's been a resurgence lately of people getting interested in different functional mushrooms and learning about all the different health properties of different mushrooms in the wild, like lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, turkey tail, those amongst many. And mushrooms have inspired a lot in our society. They've inspired a lot of art, a lot of music, a lot of painting, a lot of consciousness expansion, and mushrooms are just a very powerful thing that touch so many facets of life. You know, it's not just health, it's not just consciousness, it's not just art, it's everything. Mushrooms, the mycelial archetype is a universal archetype in nature. You look at the way that the mycelium branches with the shape of a tree. You look at that branching fractal structure. That shape is a universal motif. It is the shape of lightning. It is the shape of tree roots. It is the shape of rivers. It is the shape of our blood vessels. It's the shape of our neurons. That motif is universal, and I think that the mycelium has this intelligence that is very powerful. And I think it's worth mentioning that it was actually psychedelic mushrooms that piqued my interest in mushrooms as a whole.
Okay.
And I think many people kind of come from that same origin story. You know, Paul Stamets and others who are into the world of mycology. And my foray into the whole psychedelic movement has kind of pivoted around decriminalization. So one of the most prominent realms of energy output in my life has been as an activist. I call myself a psychedelic liberator. I first got into the activist space with psychedelics in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where I lived for 5 years. I went to school in Ann Arbor, went to University of Michigan, and in Ann Arbor, I was a part of a group called the Michigan Psychedelic Society, which was kind of like, it was like a club.
Was this before or after you started first trying psychedelics?
Oh, way after.
Okay.
This was after I'd graduated college, and I was, trying to find a community, trying to find a friend group, and there was the Michigan Psychedelic Society, which was a club. It was just a group of people who got together to talk and share experiences about psychedelics. You know, a lot of people who were a part of this group were people who did psychedelics, had really powerful experiences with psychedelics, but didn't have anybody to share their stories with. You know, some of these people came from families that were, more on the conservative side and, weren't really open-minded to hearing about stuff like this. And people who've had these experiences, they want to share them.
Where did you fall on that spectrum?
Oh, I've always been very open-minded and open to experience. That's probably I probably max out the spec of openness to experience. And yeah, so in the Michigan Psychedelic Society, I found a really great community of people who were just so into psychedelics and talking about, all realms of the expansion of consciousness and harm reduction and, different insights that we've acquired with psychedelics. And out of the Michigan Psychedelic Society sprouted this organization called Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor, which was inspired by Decriminalized Nature Oakland and Decriminalized Nature Santa Cruz. And so basically the premise of Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor was to follow suit of the other two decriminalized nature movements that had succeeded getting the cities of Oakland and Santa Cruz to vote to decriminalize entheogenic substances in their city. And I was invited to join the steering committee of Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor. And basically the template of what we did was do exactly what Oakland and Santa Cruz did, which was rally up the community, get people to voice their experiences, their profound stories of transformation and healing and spiritual work and everything that they had gone through with psychedelics, and tell their stories publicly on the record to the local elected leaders. We got people to speak at the podium at city council meetings. We got members of our community to send emails to the city council members. We got people to record video testimonials and send those video testimonials to the city council members. And eventually, we finally found a few members of the Ann Arbor City Council that were interested in championing the cause. And we hosted a big fundraiser event at this bar in Ann Arbor. And I think 2 or 3 members of the Ann Arbor City Council actually showed up to the event for Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor.
That's a very involved process to get started into, especially the political side of it. I don't think a lot of people who aren't involved in that know how intense and interwoven and all of the red tape that you really have to go through. What was that process like for you to experience that?
You know, the really beautiful thing about it is the movement was very inspired. You know, we didn't have to drag people out to speak. We told people that, hey, we're doing this movement, and then people were so eager to show up and speak. People were very eager to tell their stories, you know. It was something that already spoke to the heart of people. It was something that already spoke to, you know, something really powerful. And they were like, thank you for creating this channel. Thank you for creating this conduit for us to release this into the world and to create change. And so, yeah, like working with politics many times can be very cumbersome and annoying, and dealing with bureaucracy, and it's a lot of annoyingness. But with a movement that people really care about, a lot of that difficulty just kind of like gets washed away. It becomes very effortless.
When your heart's in it, that's kind of the medicine, and that's part of what I believe, you know, for the podcast is the medicine is community, music, and our purpose or our diamond gifts, you know, and it sounds like that's what you're speaking into is people finally getting to understand, you know, more deeper meanings through those experiences and wanting to tap into that and understand more and connect in the community with other people. So that's really cool that you got to have the beginning of start of the beginning of your journey in that way where it's very active and connected.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about what happened in Ann Arbor was we kind of envisioned that this was going to be a long battle. We thought that, all right, we're going to have to kind of get city council to maybe introduce some sort of language resolution that, you know, mentions decriminalization, and then they'd probably have to read it and then discuss it and then table it and then bring it up in the future meeting, and then they'd probably discuss it some more and then table it again. And, you know, we thought this was going to be a long political process, working with how city councils work, and the pace of politics is very slow. So we thought it was going to be a very slow, drawn-out process. But one day we got news that the city council, the Ann Arbor City Council, was going to introduce the language onto the floor. So one of our sponsors, I forget his name. I think it might have been Jeff. I forget his last name. But we had a sponsor who introduced the language into the Ann Arbor City Council, and we thought that, all right, this is just going to be like the first step out of many steps.
So to get this introduced or get a sponsorship, how big of a deal is that? What does that mean?
It just means that a member of city council has to believe in it. You know, a member has to be like, all right, I'm gonna bother the rest of city council and put this on our busy agenda and kind of like make this part of city business.
Was that a big deal for you guys?
It's a huge deal.
Yeah. Because
that's like the main, that's probably like the biggest gateway to cross. Because once you've made it into the pipeline, it becomes part of city business. Because you can nag on city council as much as you want. You can keep on emailing them. You can post flyers around town. You can do whatever you want. You can bug the hell out of them. But if they don't put it on the agenda, then it's just not, they don't touch it, you know. But getting them to actually add it to the agenda and introduce it to the floor is a huge step. Probably like the biggest hurdle to overcome. So yeah, that happened. They introduced the resolution, and we thought, okay, this was just going to be the intro session. And then, so they introduced it, and then we all of a sudden hear, this caught us by surprise, we all of a sudden hear motion to vote. And then we hear, seconded. And then the Ann Arbor City Council voted 11-0 to decriminalize entheogenic substances in Ann Arbor.
Wow.
And whew, what a surprise that was. That just like blew our minds because we were not expecting them to vote that day, and we weren't even expecting it to be unanimous. You know, the interesting thing was there was one member of the Ann Arbor City Council that cracked jokes about our movement. You know, somebody had written an op-ed, and then there was some press interviews, and they interviewed this person on the Ann Arbor City Council, and she basically made fun of our organization. She was like, oh, they're trying to take Ann Arbor back to the hippie 60s, and kind of was like really dismissive and kind of like, you know, didn't have nice things to say about us. But to our surprise, she actually ended up voting yes for our resolution. And, you know, that just goes to show the power of when people from the community actually speak up and inundate city council. Because the interesting thing about local politics is, for the record, I'm pretty cynical about politics. I'm pretty cynical about like state and federal, and you know,
don't seem like a cynical person.
I think in politics,
was that your cynical laugh?
Cynicism is an asset. I think statewide and then federal, you know, the higher up the rungs of the ladder you go in politics, the more corrupt it gets. The more it's pay to play, the more it's influenced by big money. But when it comes to local politics, when you talk about like city politics, like members of like city councils, especially in, you know, like cities that aren't like big cities like New York or Austin or San Francisco, on the smaller scale, these are actually members of the community. These are our neighbors. These are people that care. And when they see that there's a movement that is actually speaking from the heart, and then people, their neighbors, members of the community are coming out and speaking up, they tend to listen. You know, if you ever pay attention to any city council meetings anywhere, the conversations are really mundane and boring. You know, like they're talking about, all right, how are we going to fund the library? Who is going to pick up the trash? Who's going to sweep the snow?
Most people don't even know how to connect into that, or don't even know that they're happening, don't even know a lot of information about that.
Totally. And then when they hear about these entheogens and psychedelics, and these people are talking about tapping into profound spiritual transformation. They're talking about healing relationships with long-lost loved ones. They're talking about healing from postpartum depression, PTSD. And these stories are coming from the heart. And then these city council member people who are used to all the mundane banality of city politics, their ears perk up. They're like, all right, this is cool. This is interesting. We're going to listen. And in Ann Arbor, that worked. So yeah, we won. We won very swiftly, very unexpectedly in Ann Arbor, very resoundingly. And then shortly thereafter, I moved to Boulder and joined the Decrim Nature Boulder movement here in Colorado, which was already going on. And that whole story is its own timeline about what happened over the past 2 years in Colorado. But we can talk about that in a little bit. But for now, I just want to circle back to Myco Cafe, how we got here.
So let's just recap there. So from that place, you kind of started your journey and involvement with mushrooms in Ann Arbor, and that was through this decrim movement there, and you know, feeling that passion and the excitement and the connection with other people really inspired you through your move out here, which you then continued your decrim movement and then got inspired to
Absolutely.
come here.
And I think winning in Ann Arbor so resoundingly was like a huge morale boost, because I think that morale is probably like the single most important variable in determining how successful and efficacious a movement can be, because the morale it goes deep. Morale is fundamental. Morale penetrates to the core. When people have good morale, that like inspires everything about how people go. When people have no morale, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people think, oh no, there's no way we can win, that's self-fulfilling. If you think there's no way you can win, then that will manifest. If you believe with full conviction, we got this, I see the path right there, and then you follow that path, then you will win. You know, it's law of attraction. It's just following like the universe's innate pathway. It's like being that
Following
lightning.
the mycelium.
Well, yes, it's like being the mycelium, being the lightning strike, following that path of least resistance. And you know, lightning has this remarkable ability to just know where the path of least resistance is. Water, when it flows down the mountain, it will just go down the path of least resistance. And nature has this remarkable propensity to just find that path. And when we become a force of nature, we become that energy, and we will become that path.
It's interesting that you talk about that, because On the previous episode, I was talking with a death doula, and she brings into her work water and grief. And she was saying the same thing, where she learns all of her medicine from the water. And she was talking about, water doesn't go up the hill, it goes downhill through the path of least resistance. And so I think that's really interesting that you bring that up. And, just an amazing quality for us as humans in this experience to just kind of sit back and lean back into, everything's going to be taken care of. And like you said, the law of attraction or whatever that energetic frequency is that you want to call it, to connect into. So the Myco Cafe, tell me about the Myco Cafe.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on this briefly earlier, that there has been a lot of interest in the different health properties of mushrooms, and there's a lot of scientific research that shows that there's different beta-glucans and diterpenoids and different compounds that are found in mushrooms that are super beneficial for health. And just to give a little bit of background about myself is I studied neuroscience in college. I have a degree in neuroscience, and when I graduated, I started working in the clinical research industry. And what that means is, say there is a new medical product, like let's say a new medical device or a new pharmaceutical drug or a new anything medical that is not on the market yet, but the producers want it to be on the market. In this country, for a medical product to be on the market, it first has to get FDA approval. And the way a substance or a product gets FDA approval is it has to go through clinical trials. What that means is they recruit volunteers who basically sign a waiver and says, hey, this is an experimental substance, and then they give them they administer the investigative product, and then they take data before and after.
That's what you were doing?
Yes. So there's like a control group, and then there's the experiment group, and the control group just gets a placebo. The experiment group gets the actual product. And it's a pretty difficult process for substances to make it past the clinical trial process. It's really expensive.
So you got to see behind the scenes of how that process is?
Yes.
Interesting. I don't want to divert too much off topic, but I'd be curious to know the external influences that were impacting, because Bruce Lipton, who is also a very huge proponent of epigenetics and how we can control our reality, our genetics, he talks about that in his book too. So
totally, yeah. No, there's a lot, and the way I'll kind of like try and touch on what you're trying to get out of me in a way that stays pertinent and focused to the conversation, which is that clinical trials are very expensive, and the only things that make it to clinical trials are things that pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies have an incentive to invest all that money into, because they'll get an ROI. They want to get a return on investment. For example, one of the reasons why I felt really demoralized by working in that industry was a lot of the work that I was assigned was bioequivalency studies where, let's say, for example, a pharmaceutical company has a drug that treats, let's say, a random condition, let's say like asthma or something. And then this drug, their patent is about to expire. So what happens when their patent expires is that every company in the world can start producing it and selling it at a generic price, and then this company can no longer make a shit ton of money. So what they do is they get their chemists to go to the laboratory, and they get their chemists to tweak the molecule just a little bit. They'll like replace this nitrogen with an oxygen, or they'll add an extra hydrogen here. They'll create an analog of that previous molecule, and then they'll put that molecule to clinical trials. And then they'll try and determine, all right, which dose of this new molecule is equivalent to the old molecule. And then once it gets past clinical trials, they'll patent the new molecule. They'll stop marketing the old molecule. Therefore, they can make a shit ton of profit by having the market exclusivity by patenting this new molecule. So it's basically a money game. They're investing all this money, not because they're trying to develop new drugs to treat conditions. They're basically taking old drugs and remixing them just so they can patent them so they can make profit. And then that's like a lot of the work in clinical research industry is doing these studies, because that's where the money is. So to step back a little bit, natural stuff. Like, for example, a lot of the beta-glucans found in mushrooms. I'll give you a really, really prominent example that really sticks out for me. There's a disease called multiple sclerosis. That is when it's an autoimmune condition where a person's immune system starts attacking the myelin, which is the layer that insulates neurons in the brain. It's a fatty layer that basically produces the insulation for electrical signals in the brain. So the immune system starts attacking myelin. And when the immune system attacks the myelin, the insulation breaks down, and then people's nervous systems have trouble communicating. So a lot of people with multiple sclerosis struggle with paralysis, fatigue, trouble thinking, brain fog. Their nervous systems are kind of like toned down. And one of the terrible things about multiple sclerosis is that when myelin gets broken down, it doesn't regenerate. So different parts of the body, whenever they get broken down.
Is that when it starts to cripple?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So different parts of the body can regenerate. If you cut yourself, your skin will regenerate. If you break your bone, your bones will regenerate. Myelin does not regenerate. So if your immune system attacks your myelin,
SOS.
Yeah, that's it. And then so there's a huge need for something that can treat myelin degeneration. And there's different neurodegenerative conditions as well beyond multiple sclerosis that involve myelin being attacked. And for all of them, the treatments are sparse. There's, for example, I think there's a thyroid hormone that helps regrow myelin, but has a side effect where you immediately become really obese. And so that's not really a viable option. And then there is this organization, I think it's called the Myelin Organization or something like that, where they've donated millions of dollars to try and put drugs through clinical trials to find a treatment for multiple sclerosis, and to no avail. Now here's where the mushrooms come in. There's a mushroom called lion's mane, and lion's mane produces a substance called aranacine A. Lion's mane has many different aranacine substances. Aranacine A, B, and C are pretty notable, but aranacine A has been shown in studies to actually be able to regrow myelin. So people who have lost myelin, when they consume aranacine A, it helps them regrow myelin. So myelin, whenever it gets broken down, for the most part, it can't regenerate. But in lion's mane, there's a substance that can regrow myelin. However, let's say somebody has multiple sclerosis and they go to their doctor and they want to get treatment. Technically, a doctor is not allowed to prescribe lion's mane mushroom or aranacine A because it's not been FDA approved to treat multiple sclerosis. And a doctor can lose their license if they suggest treatments that are not approved by the FDA in this country. Theoretically, lion's mane and aranacine A can be FDA approved if it goes through the clinical trials and they show that, hey, the experiment group showed significant increases in myelin versus the placebo group, which didn't, and then it goes through that process, the experimental process, they show that it does, it can get FDA approved, it can get the stamp of approval. However, that's not going to happen because clinical trials are super expensive. A company has to invest millions of dollars to hire the principal investigator. You got to pay the staff at the research site. You got to pay the people doing the blood work. You got to pay the subjects, the volunteer subjects for doing the clinical trial. So that whole process is really, really, really expensive. And because companies don't have any incentive to run those clinical trials because there's no return on investment. Because if a company puts lion's mane through the clinical trial process and then it gets FDA approved, then every company in the world can create lion's mane extract and then market it as a treatment for multiple sclerosis. Mm-hmm. And then the company that invested those millions of dollars on the clinical trials won't get a return on investment because they've basically released this to the world because natural substances are not patentable.
So basically what you're saying is that by having the wisdom and the knowledge and resources outside of that, it can be really helpful. Or are you saying that it should be going through the FDA?
I think that, so it's kind of like a dilemma because for the most part, the reason why the FDA's process is very strict, it was actually, if you look at the research, it was put in place after major catastrophes. For example, the Tuskegee experiment incidents. Are you aware of the Tuskegee experiments? Basically, there were, I think, African Americans, I think in Ohio or something, that were being experimented on without their consent. They were they were given syphilis or something, and they were not given treatment. And basically, a lot of like the medical establishment was experimenting on black people without their consent. And then when word got out, this caused a huge uproar, and it spurred major reforms to the medical system, where a lot of the regulations involved with the FDA were made to be very strict and to ensure the safety and protection of people. So many of the regulations that the FDA has were put in place to protect people. I don't necessarily think they were designed to exclude natural treatments, because they theoretically can include natural treatments. That the major nexus point here is that it's expensive to run clinical trials. So I think that it's not necessary that you have to have the approval of the FDA to know that something works, because if it works, it works. And you can trust indigenous wisdom, you can trust naturalist wisdom, you can trust herbalist wisdom to know that substances have efficacy and promise to treat people. So no, I don't think that it's necessary to have to listen to the FDA guidelines. However, they're there for a reason. They're there to protect people. It's just a side effect that they're so strict that it makes it impossible for natural substances to really make it through all those gateways without a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So I'd like to circle back here to your cafe, and it seems like you have a lot of experience within kind of this natural medicine, and also the placement within, I'll call it the system, for lack of a better word, right? And so now you kind of come into this place where you're bringing the two together in a sense. So what inspired you to start doing that, bringing these medicinal properties of these mushrooms here? Was it the things that you were talking about before with those challenges that people are having? Were you seeing that, or what was your experience like?
I think it's a bigger picture thing, all of these factors kind of like play a part. Like number one, mycelium is just a very like fundamental archetype of the universe. Number two, it's just like mushrooms just have so much of a majesty to them. There are these like intelligent organisms that myceliate into the ground and create networks like neurons.
Their own kingdom.
Exactly. They're their own kingdom. The largest organism on Earth is the humongous fungus in Oregon.
Wow.
And then there's all these health benefits, and I think that like fungi and mushrooms and mycelium, they're ripe in our zeitgeist, and I think that especially with psychedelic mushrooms like psilocybin being a very profound catalyst for the transformation of consciousness, kind of like being the cherry on top, and basically making it so that, hey, mushrooms, that's where it's at. Mushrooms are where it's at. There's so much you could do with mushrooms. They're good for your health. They're good for your consciousness. They're good for your mental health. They're good for the environment, the ecosystem. They are nature's decomposers. They recycle all of the constituent compounds of nature and distribute them into the rest of the ecosystem. They form a communication network between trees. Mycorrhizal fungi form networks with tree roots, and they transport nutrients amongst each other. They are just such an integral part of our ecosystem, and I think that the time is right to kind of like create a center like this, a cafe, where it can kind of be a hub for the proliferation, for the sporulation of mushrooms to the rest of the community. And I'll use this opportunity to mention that part of the concept of the cafe is not necessarily just the mushroom product; it's also the art, because the main thing, the other side of this cafe, is the vibes. This is going to be an opportunity for local artists to exhibit their art, to sell their art, to kind of be a place where people can come in, enjoy a delicious and healthy mushroom-infused beverage, and also enjoy beautiful local art. And there's going to be canvases from local artists cycling on the walls. People can come in here, and if they see a canvas on the wall that they really like, they can buy it. The artist gets the proceeds from that. And that just improves the vibe. It improves the energy of the place. You come into the place and you get to enjoy art, you get to enjoy deliciousness, and it's just good vibes all around. And I think that this is something that the community really needs.
Amazing. Yeah, that was going to be my next question for you too, is like, what do you envision this being for you and your intention for creating it?
Yeah, I envision this to be basically a community center where people can come in, and I think the culture of a coffee shop goes deep. I think it originated in, it might have been Turkey or something like that, where back in the olden days, people would go to the coffee shop to intellectualize, to gossip, to talk with your friends, to just be that place where a conversation amongst the community happened, kind of like a public forum. And just capturing that legacy into this place and having it be a spot for conversation, a spot for assembly, a spot for fellowship. At some point in the future, I'm going to develop the back room to be an event space where people can have spoken word events, we can have art events, we can have music shows, dance parties, you name it. Like there's going to be lots of opportunity for this place to be a center for community, all centered around the mushroom.
I love that. And that's you said before, your slogan is follow the mycelium, and that really is representative of what it does. It connects different communities, of life, and really is that point in between. So I love that you're kind of using this in tandem to that philosophy of, creating that place in the center of co-creation for people and connection in the community space. And also with your interest and passion in the decrim movement, do you see that being involved at all with the cafe?
The interesting thing is a lot of like the big work, the big activist movement in Colorado has kind of like had its heyday. There's still a lot of work to be done.
There's an event coming up in August, right?
The conference,
yeah.
The MAPS conference.
Yeah.
No, there's still a lot of reason to congregate around psychedelics. Decrim wise, there's still work to be done as well. But like the major work, which was like rallying the community to speak in favor of decrim, has kind of like been, made moot by the passage of Prop 122 in Colorado. And we can talk about, like the whole commercialization versus decriminalization politics side of decrim.
Well, I'm curious
if you want to.
Yeah, I'm curious right now specifically for what you view for the cafe and how you see that either connecting together or not.
It's interesting because if I had opened this cafe a year ago, I would have definitely had this be a place to have assemblies and reconnaissance meetings and just have the community come together to plan our whole process with decriminalization. There's definitely opportunity for this to be a place where people can meet in the occasion that lawmakers try to undermine the personal use and decriminalization provisions of Prop 122, which we have caught wind may be happening here in Colorado. So just to give a little bit of context, I was an advocate in Colorado, part of Decriminalized Nature Boulder, before Prop 122 was even conceived of, and we had been working really hard in the city of Boulder, kind of emulating what I mentioned we did in Ann Arbor. We had been getting people to show up at Boulder City Council meetings, to speak at open comment, to tell their stories. We've been getting people to email City Council. We've been getting people to come to big events. We had 2 huge rallies, 2 huge music, art, and activism events. The Decriminalized Nature Boulder Bash, we had 2 of them at downtown Boulder at the Riverside, and those were really amazing events. The community came together. We had live music, we had live painting, silent auction, people came in costumes. It was just amazing show of energy. And then what happened was this out-of-state organization called New Approach PAC saw that Colorado was a ripe place to push a psychedelic ballot measure. And they advanced Initiative 58, which started gathering signatures, and we immediately became skeptical as a community because it was an out-of-state organization, kind of like stepping over the local community and advancing their own policy that included a regulated access framework that was not up to our standards. It basically created a commercial model where the regulations would not be clear. It would basically assigned it allowed the governor of Colorado to appoint a panel of 15 people who were going to set the rules. And immediately that's a red flag because, you
want the community forward.
Right. We want the community. We want the legacy stewards of these substances, people who have a deep history of using the medicine, to be the ones who are in charge of determining how any sort of regulated container would roll out. But the way Prop 122 was written was that it would allow the governor to appoint 15 people. And then it gives no semblance of like, who are these 15 people going to be? We don't know who they're going to be. It could be anybody. It did give some guidelines, like there has to be like an expert on indigenous traditional use. There has to be an expert on insurance. There has to be an expert. You know what I'm saying? So I had like a list of like how the list had to be comprised. But other than that, it was a very open-ended thing, and we did not trust how that would roll out. And so Prop 122 passed, and fortunately, while it was being written, we were able to convince the authors to pull out a component that included limits to possession. They were originally going to include a 4-gram limit to possession, and one of my fundamental principles when it comes to decrim is no limits to possession, because adding limits to possession creates scarcity. What that means is if a person has a limit to possession, let's say you can only have like 4 grams of active product or whatever, but corporations that are supplying the substance in their corporate setting with the healing centers or retreat centers, they have no limits to possession, so they can basically
kind of creates an imbalance in the
right
scale.
Exactly. So the local grassroots community kind of has a ceiling, whereas the corporate community side does not have a ceiling.
Sounds like the same problem at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we were thankfully we were able to get them to pull out the limits to possession, which was a huge victory. And so when Prop 122 passed, a lot of people in the community voted no, but still saw it as a victory because, hey, you know, this bill has like this whole regulated access framework, which is going to be kind of like besmirched by, you know, like the corporate cronyism and the capitalist like industrial complex and all that is kind of like going to get their fingers on it. But as long as we have like the personal use decrim side, we can still choose how to relate to the medicine. You know, if we want to go out in nature, trip 4 grams of mushrooms like on our own, we can do that. If we want to trip with a bunch of friends in a basement, we can do that. You know, so the fact that it has the personal use left the doors open for people to relate however they choose, and that was a victory. So we could kind of like say that, okay, so the regulated access framework, they're going to do what they do. Like corporations are going to corporation, government's going to government, and that's going to be its thing. But as long as we have the personal use, we're good. So recent development that we heard was that there are a few lawmakers in Colorado that are interested in passing legislation that would kind of like rewrite the personal use section. They want to put guardrails on it. They want to kind of regulate it. They want to kind of like add some sort of limitation to it, and that caused an uproar. So when we first caught rumors that these lawmakers were going to modify the personal use section of Prop 122, we caused an uproar. We put out the message on social media. The messages went viral. It went viral on Instagram, went viral on Reddit, and then people from all over the state started emailing these lawmakers about their concerns. And then there just so happened to be a town hall meeting planned with 2 of the lawmakers, Senator Fenberg and Judy Amabile. They happened to have a town hall meeting where the community assembled. We basically like booked out half the seats in the room and showed up to that town hall meeting. It was supposed to be a general legislative town hall meeting where they were going to talk about what's on their plate for the legislative session, and then we basically just made the whole conversation about decriminalization and mushrooms and let the message be known that, hey, we voted, don't touch this. Do not touch the personal use. Do not touch the decrim. If you want to come in and figure out how to manage like the regulated access framework, do whatever you want with that. As long as you don't touch the personal use, as long as you don't touch the decrim, we're fine. And just to circle back to the cafe, I think in situations like that where there's something that emerges that requires activation, something that emerges that requires organization, having a community space like this to be available to the community is something that I definitely want to use to our advantage.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like it'd be a great place to be a catalyst for that. I'd love to see how that framework works for you. And then I know we're wrapping up on time here, so I'd love to offer up, a few minutes for anything else that, I'd love to hear like why this is important to you. And, a lot of the listeners I feel like are going to be coming from both ends of the spectrum of, maybe never using any mushrooms to using a lot medicinally. Non-psychedelic, non-psychoactive and psychoactive, from all those different ranges. So I guess kind of twofold going into that. How is this impacting you? And what does this kind of mean for all of those spectrums of listeners?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will tell you why psychedelics are so important to me. So I just finished my freshman year in college, and I was curious about experimenting with psychedelics, and I went out to a place in Ann Arbor called the Arboretum. It's a beautiful nature preserve. It's like somewhere between a park, a nature preserve, and kind of like a university research facility where they basically have all these like trees curated from all over the world. So like you'll walk through one section of the Arb, and you're in the trees in Appalachia, and then you walk another 100 feet, you're in the trees in Japan. You walk another 100 feet, you're in wetlands. You walk another 100 feet, you're down by the river, and then there's a meadow, there's a prairie. You know, it has all these different ecosystems that are kind of like curated into this one big park, and it's a really beautiful place. The Arboretum is amazing. One of my favorite places on earth.
And this place inspired you to go explore.
Oh yeah, so this was the setting for one of my most profound psychedelic experiences.
Okay.
And I just remember I sat down on a bench, and then the substance was creeping up on me, and I just remember closing my eyes, and then feeling like the grandness of existence all reveal itself to me. I felt that the entirety of time, like all eternity, felt like it was just now. Like there was no longer like a past, present, and a future. It was just a now. It was just a oneness. It was like it was like the Big Bang, like the creation of the universe till this present moment was just like one happening. And then I felt the gravity of the earth like pushing up against me, and I felt all like whatever, like some million pounds of mass of the earth was pushing on me. And then I closed my eyes, and the sun was pounding down on my skin, and then I felt the energy of the sun just like pulse through me. It was like the sun was closer to me than my own skin. It was like the energy of the sun was like pulsing my heart. It was beating my heart. And then just I felt like this download of intuition where like all of the energy from the sun, which was spinning the earth, which was feeding the trees, which was feeding me, and then like all the trees were breathing out the oxygen, I was breathing out carbon, we were exchanging energy, and then the wind was brushing upon the hair on my skin, and like the wind felt like it was like a substance, it was a fluid. The birds were swimming through air, and in that one moment, I kind of like I had like this zoom out where like the sun, that what was now like the most like grand thing in my existence and my consciousness, the source of energy of my heartbeat, the source of energy of my sustenance, of the trees, of everything, it became a little dot swirling in space. And then I said, so like all 13.7 billion years of the universe became a one. It was just now. I was in the eternal now. And then I realized that primordial energy of the universe was me. I was that energy. And then that was the most profound moment of my life. And then from that moment, I realized the interconnectedness of the whole ecosystem. I realized that like all of the water that's in my body, I'm like 70-something% water. That water just a week ago was dripping down a leaf in a rainforest. Another drop of water was coming down a waterfall. Another drop of water was in a river. Another drop of water was in a cloud, in a thunderstorm, and I could see just like all these sources of water in the ecosystem had funneled into me, and I was connected to all the water. And I realized that like all the food that I eat, like every little piece of lettuce, every single piece of chicken, every little piece of everything, was connected into that ecology, connected into that ecosystem. It was just a giant web of life. And all the oxygen I was breathing, just I beheld the interdependence and the interconnectedness of the universe, and just how we are all just manifestations of that same primordial energy of the cosmos being recycled. And everything that I just took, however long I've been speaking to describe, was like an instantaneous insight. It was just like a download where it all just clicked at once. And just like that profound mystical experience was the single most pivotal experience of my life, the single most defining moment of my life. And I think that I would not be the same person without that experience. And I think that if more people have that experience, we would be able to get past our differences. We would be able to get past all these things that separate us, our tribalism, our bickerings. And I don't think it's an instant solution. I don't think, psychedelics are the panacea that's going to solve every problem in the universe. I don't think psychedelics are for everybody, but I think that having a tool that can invoke that experience from people, that mystical experience of cosmic consciousness and oneness and interconnectedness, that is probably the best medicine that humanity can ask for.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience. It's very vivid, and it sounds like definitely a profound experience to, connect in everything, especially at that age. I feel like college is like all about me, kind of nowheres in the world type of thing, at least for me in that sense. And very similar. I first experimented with psychedelic substances in college, and they were very interesting. And same to you, I think that it opened up, this new world. I started going into conspiracy theories and all of that, and not because it was right or wrong, but because it opened up the world to something bigger. And it was like this connection that I always felt to something, was more, it became almost less etheric and more tangible. And so I definitely agree with you here in a certain perspective. I don't feel like they're gateway drugs. I love to use that. We had DARE in whatever school that was, and I just think it's kind of comical. We talk about gateway drugs, and it's like, well, yeah, it is a gateway drug. Like, it's an amazing gateway and like portal into this universe that we get to experience life as. So that's a very beautiful experience. Amazing. Okay, so anything else that you would like to share before I ask about your secret sauce?
I think let's just jump into the secret sauce.
Okay. So with that, what is your secret sauce to life, Ramzy?
Okay. So the way I'll describe this is, the other day I was thinking about manifestation energy, and someone said, or let me think about how to phrase this. Okay, so the thought occurred to me that, hey, what if I drive my manifestation energy into overdrive? And it occurred to me that saying driving your manifestation energy into overdrive is an oxymoron, because the essence of manifestation energy is Wu Wei. So one of my most defining philosophies in life is the Chinese philosophy of Taoism. So to kind of like reiterate what I just described, my mystical experience in the Arboretum, I had an experience of what you might describe the Tao. I felt like that which flows life, like that primordial energy of the cosmos, of the Big Bang, becoming the sun and the solar system and the earth, and then moving the wind and the waves of the ocean and all that. That's the Tao. That is like the fundamental force of the universe which flows. And through the Tao, you have like the yin and the yang and the polarity. And then one of the most fundamental philosophies of Taoism is the concept of Wu Wei. And then Wu Wei, basically, it's hard to translate, but it kind of like means like doing through undoing, doing through not doing, or effort through effortlessness, or if you get it, you get it. It's the concept of like not forcing.
That's your secret sauce.
That's the secret sauce. Is you don't force. If you don't force anything, you find the innate rhythm of the universe. You get in tune with the Tao, and Taoism has another concept called Zhen Ren, which translates to perfected being or something like that, and it kind of like speaks to being able to like find like that flow and like tuning into that flow and working with it. For example, the bird that floats through the sky without waving its wings, it's just gliding because it's found like that heat draft and it can just glide. Or the swimmer that can swim 30 miles in the ocean and never get tired because they found that current. Or the butcher who cuts meat for 30 years never has to sharpen the knife because they follow like the natural lines of the flesh, the fibers in the flesh. Like it's things to that effect. If you find like that natural groove and you just like surf it.
I love it.
That's the secret sauce.
Amazing.
And then it's effortless. you find the groove, life becomes effortless. And then this is applied in so many ways in my life. You know, with the movement, for example, I mentioned this early on with like the whole political decrim movement. It was effortless because we just found something that just wanted to escape. We found something that just wanted to be spoken.
The momentum was there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The momentum is there. The innate energy is there. Mm-hmm. And that innate energy of the cosmos is the Tao. That is like the divine energy just wanting to be channeled.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ramzy, and thank you for sharing your space and your medicine with everyone. I think it will be very valuable for people who are exploring this or even well-versed in it. And I will share any links that you'd like to share with people to connect to you. And if you'd like to just share, I think you mentioned April 1st is the goal for the cafe.
Yeah, it's not official yet.
Right.
Still waiting on the regulatory agencies, the health department, to give the stamp of approval.
We'll cross our fingers.
We'll cross our fingers. If not the first, sometime in April is our projected goal.
Amazing. And they can follow you on social media to stay up to date.
I'm most active on Instagram, so you could follow the cafe Instagram, myco.cafe. And yeah, that's probably the main resource to stay in the loop right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again. And if you're listening, I highly encourage you to come check out the cafe and all of the beautiful artwork. You can see this back here, and the drinks are so yummy. And great company. So thank you again so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right.
All right, that's a wrap.
Amazing.
I would have brought my little clapboard. Cut.